Whatever happened to Donna Reed? Whatever happened to Donna Reed? I don't know if you have a favorite decade, but Sarah does. Sarah has a favorite decade to watch, particularly television programs from, but she loves the cars. She loves really everything about the styles of the 1950s. My wife loves the 50s, and she loves the Donna Reed show. She also loves Father Knows Best. She loves things from the 50s. And why is that? What did TV from the 50s portray? An ideal family life. Children with problems that could be handled in one 25-minute segment. Arguments that never lasted longer than a commercial break. Houses were clean. Food was home-cooked. Clothing was wrinkle-free. And hair was always immaculate. And Sarah loves the 1950s. And as we look around at our world here, we can say, what happened? My hair's a mess. What happened to the 1950s? What happened to Donna Reed? We can feel like times are changing and things are getting worse faster than we can keep up with. Let's read more of this prophecy from Daniel. Let's conclude with the explanation, the interpretation that Daniel has given, picking up in verse 15. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it. And behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called, Gabriel, make this man understand this vision. So he came near where I stood. And when he came, I was frightened and fell on my face. But he said to me, understand, O Son of Man, that the vision is for the time of the end. And when he had spoken to me, I fell into a deep sleep, with my face to the ground. But he touched me and made me stand up. He said, behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors have reached their limit, a king of bold face, one who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. And he shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper. Under his hand and in his own mind he shall become great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and he shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. And I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I rose and went about the king's business, but I was appalled by the vision and did not understand it. How does this prophecy passage end? Exactly the same as chapter 7, doesn't it? With Daniel, in verse 27, Daniel is overcome. He lays sick. He's faced with the tide of history again, the chaos that he's surrounded with, and he's sick again. But this time we have a different type of chaos. This isn't just kingdom chaos. This isn't just leadership chaos. This is a generational chaos. This is a shifting times that Daniel is forced to look upon in this ram and this goat vision. There's a musical artist that, I'm sorry I'm talking about Sarah so much, and there's a musical artist that Sarah and I listen to. Her name's Demi Lovato. You may know her, you may not, and she has a song from a little while ago, and one of the lines of the song is, I want to get back, she sings, I want to get back to the old days when the phone would ring and I knew it was you. Actually, it was the old days, wasn't it? Now I pick up my phone when it's ringing and it tells me who it is. Often it shows me a picture of the person who's calling because I put the photo in there and says, yeah, this is someone you know calling you. Or since I have AT&T, it actually warns me now. It says, warning, AT&T fraud alert, which is great. Or it says telemarketer. And I'm like, well, I'm not answering that. That was the old days when Demi's singing about, when you heard a phone ring and actually walked over to pick it up and answer it. It was the old days, wasn't it? That song was written in 2008. How old was it? Not very. But that's how fast our times change. 2008 can feel like the old days with how quickly communication technology has adapted. Times change so fast. And that's the first point we have to look at as we approach this passage. Generations are at war with one another. Generations are at war as times change. Generations conflict. Daniel is given this vision. He's given a vision of shifting times by God. And this is still before the Persian invasion of Babylon. This is still we see during Belshazzar's reign in verse 1. And we're going to work with this vision, like we did last week, using the best historical connections we can make, the best historical connections that biblical historians have been able to make, while still remembering that this vision also applies to the present and to the future. We need to remember that this has a message for then, now, and then to come. Verse 3, what animal does Daniel see first? He sees the ram, doesn't he? This ram with the two horns, the high horns, the noticeable horns. Makes me think of some of the animals you see at the zoo where you can't miss those horns. But this ram has a uniqueness about its horns. Horn is a common term in Old Testament literature, in the Old Testament world, representing military power. Because what does a ram use its horns for? Attack and defense. A ram's horns represent military power here. And this ram, we're told by Gabriel later, represents the Persian Empire. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. And just like we saw last week with the bear, one of the horns is higher than the other. Representing again that the Persian side, most likely representing that the Persian side is stronger than the Median side, than the Medo half of the empire. And this Persian Empire does as it pleases, which Daniel's going to experience in just a little while, as it comes in and kills Belshazzar and takes over Babylon. It does as it wants. The Bible says going to and fro, and nothing can stand against it. And this is the near future for Daniel. And this ram becomes great. And Daniel gets to see this happen like we said, but in verse 5, the ram's success is cut short, isn't it? Verse 5, a goat shows up with one conspicuous horn. A unicorn goat shows up with a conspicuous horn and decisively overpowers this Medo-Persian ram. And we're told by Gabriel also, it's not a mystery anymore. What does this goat represent? This is Greece. With the conspicuous horn being the first ruler of Greece. That's our biblical historians believe that's likeliest a reference to Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, with the central, the powerful horn, who moved out against the world with this goat with feet never touching the ground, representing how quick his conquering of the known world was, how swift, done before Alexander was out of his early 20s. And he does this in his wrath. Again, biblical historians say that's because Alexander didn't begin his conquest till after his father Philip of Macedonia was assassinated. Alexander moves out in his wrath, responding to his father's murder when he was 20 years old, conquering everything that was in front of him. An exceedingly great empire, like it says in verse 8. Alexander had an empire stretching all the way to India. Before we get too bogged down with history, we need to see that what Alexander did, is actually seen by most historians as being progress, as being a good thing. You might have heard the phrase Hellenization, the uniting of thought, the uniting of culture, the bringing people together. And this set the stage for Roman culture. It even set the groundworks for the English language, what Alexander did. But Alexander's generation was fading as well, which Daniel has predicted for him. Verse 8, at the height of his strength, what happens? Broken. The great horn is broken. Great horn is broken here, and 4 horns take his place, and that's the truth. If this is applying to Alexander, this is another connection, because he died when he was at a very young age, and 4 of his generals took over and divided his kingdom into 4 littler, weaker kingdoms. And we already talked about this last week. This is a repetition for Daniel. And God likes to use repetition because it takes us over and over to get it. We have to see it multiple times before we understand. And as you see, Daniel still doesn't get it. Even this time, when he has Gabriel explain it, he's still sick with worry and fails to understand. And we may try to salvage this and say this division of power for Alexander's empire is a good thing. We like division of power in this country, don't we? We don't need one person to get to do what they want. Division of power is a good thing. And even if we can't say it's a good thing, we can certainly say it's more modern. Division of power is more modern. In fact, if we look at all the generations leading up till now, we might want to only focus on the progress side. We might want to only focus on the progress because we're certainly more modern now than we ever were before. We're more modern. Some would say we're even more postmodern than we ever were before. But we actually have at least, some would argue 6, but we have at least 5 generations still living in America right now. 5 generations. And they're at war with one another. They're at war with who to vote for. They're at war with how to spend. They're at war with what to buy. They're at war with what to eat. They're at war with how to farm. They're at war. I have heard baby boomers say what the silent generation did wrong. I've heard Generation X say what the baby boomers did wrong. I've certainly heard millennials say what Generation X did wrong. In fact, I've heard millennials say what Generation X and the baby boomers and the silent generation did wrong. And now we have Generation Z, who are also known as the boomlets. Isn't that a great name? The boomlets. And I've heard them say, in fact, I'm going to show you in a second, a demonstration of them saying what everyone else has done wrong. But no matter which side of the argument you find yourself there today, no matter which of those living generations you are in, just notice the generations disagree. Sensibilities are conflicting. My generation, the millennials, are responsible for something. We did our very best, and are still doing our best, to kill the shopping mall. Online shopping is our thing. For the most part, we love buying stuff on Amazon, to the extent that stores were closing in malls all across America. But then came Generation Z, and the boomlets said, we like shopping malls. They're fun. I like Chick-fil-A milkshakes while I go into American Eagle. And the boomlets are bringing the mall back. Shopping malls are beginning to thrive again because the Generation Z is saying the millennials did something wrong. They're reviving it with different shopping trends, different life patterns. Goats keep overwhelming rams. But are goats better than rams? Are things getting better in this country? Are the generations getting progressively more godly? And that's our second point today. Generations are actually at war with God. What really is scaring Daniel here? Why does he lay sick? It has nothing to do with shopping malls. Why is he scared here? Is he scared that generations are fighting? Is he scared that power is going to shift from Persia to Greece sometime long after he's dead? Is that what's upsetting him? Look at verse 9. Our old enemy, I almost said old friend, he's not a friend. Our old enemy, the little horn, is back. If you remember the little horn from Daniel chapter 7, the little horn is back. And this time, the little horn grows great in multiple directions, and we're told grows great towards the glorious land. That's likely a reference to Palestine, to the place where the promised land, where God had given his people. And remember Daniel's context here. Is Daniel in Palestine? No. He's in exile in Babylon. So even if God's people get to go, when they get to go back to Palestine, a little horn is going to grow great towards them. The promised land isn't going to save God's people. They're trying to get back there, but the land isn't going to fix it. And scholars are almost unanimous here that this little horn represents one of the Caesars. Remember, Rome grew out of the Greek Empire. The little horn represents Antiochus IV, the 11th Caesar. He's a ruler out of this Hellenization, a new power generation, and he grows great. And what does he do with his greatness? What does he do with his influence? What does he do with his power? What does he do? He uses his influence to negatively affect. Everything okay, Gene? Okay, thank you. He uses this influence to negatively affect God's people. That's what he does. We see this language here. Language clear that he uses his power to combat the hosts of heaven, which Gabriel tells us later in his explanation. Gabriel tells us that the hosts of heaven represent the saints, God's people, those rescued and redeemed by God. He uses his power to battle the hosts of heaven. And some of this host and even some of the stars are thrown down beneath this little horn's feet and are trampled beneath his feet. And this is almost certainly referring to the martyrdom of Christians under Antiochus IV. He went so far as to execute the high priest of Israel, trampling stars and saints beneath his feet. But he goes further than that. He goes further. It's not enough for him to only abuse God's people. He's also battling the Prince of Hosts, who is the Lord himself, and he takes the burnt offerings away from him and overthrows his sanctuary. Again, this is likely Antiochus, because he did damage to the people's worship patterns. He forced the Jews to forsake their Old Testament Hebrew lifestyle and give up their cultural distinctives. To hurt God's people and to prevent their worship, Daniel gets shown to him here. To hurt God's people and prevent their worship isn't just attacking the people, it's a war with God himself. And that's what scares Daniel. That this little horn is going to make war against God and that the land isn't going to save him. The land he's been longing for all this time in exile isn't going to fix it. That scares Daniel. It's not just generations at war with one another, but during the shifts in generations, these generations are developing new influences, new focuses, new ways to reject God. And here's where we come in. This could be why we long for the past. Even if we could get back to the old days. The old days were at war with God too. It was just in a format, in a way, in a style that we were comfortable with. It was just a way we were comfortable with. Was being a Christian ever easy? America needed 2 Great Awakenings. And did either of them make this a fully godly nation? Many would argue that the Second Great Awakening was actually worse than the first. Did less good? Was this ever an easy nation to be Christian in? Was it easier to live as a Christian in the 1950s? There was certainly less open resistance to faith. There was less open resistance to Christianity in schools and in public places. But was this a godlier country? Were people more saved in the 1950s? There were still temptations. People were still making mistakes. We talked last week about children being taught how to hide under desks for fear of Soviet bombs. Women received lesser pay than men in the 1950s. In fact, they were often disrespected to the extent many women were seen as trophies. There was still hypocrisy. Racism and fear were widespread in the 1950s. We have to be careful as we think about the old days to not just go back to our old days. Let's go back to the old days of Daniel. Was it easy for Daniel to live as a believer? No. We have to be careful not to sugarcoat decades we've had time to adjust to. Because as soon as we get adjusted, as soon as we get comfortable with our society's sin, a new generation is going to spring up. Generations war, and the sin patterns adapt. Sarah and I got to babysit 2 of the Braden's children last weekend, Madeline and Addison. And while we were riding, when we get in a car, I like to talk. You could probably tell. I like to talk when I get in a car. I don't usually turn on the radio if I'm with people. And all of the ladies I was with were unanimous that the radio must happen and Matt must shut up. Unanimous. So we cranked on the radio to whatever the popular music of today's station is, and I was appalled. I was appalled. This is what children are listening to today. Listen to this trash, I said. The subject matter here, the content, the hollow sexuality, the insecurity, the depression, the humanism, the selfishness. Ugh. Children, you need music, and I caught myself sugarcoating. Actually, I didn't catch myself. I ranted for quite a while. Sugarcoating my decades. You need to get back to the good music of the 80s and the 90s. I actually said this out loud. We had stuff to listen to back in the day, back in the old days. We had stuff to listen to, I said, and I ranted for quite a while. But then I thought about it. After I was done ranting, it was a sweet rant. I was nice about it, telling them how wrong they were. But I thought about it then. I thought about it. And I realized that modern music has the same sin as 80s music. And 80s music had the same sin as 90s music. Because it was the same humans, same people in need of a savior, the same selfishness, the same insecurities, the same hollow sexuality. Just with different catchy lyrics and different catchy tunes. Just because I like the catchiness of the 80s and 90s doesn't make it more godly. And I had the same conversation with some older folks after that with these children's grandparents. And they said, oh, forget your 80s. We need to go back to the good music of the 60s. What was the message then? Selfishness, insecurity, and hollow sexuality. Gotta get back to the old days, we say, and we have to be so careful not to sugarcoat it. We need to expect difficulties living as a Christian because Jesus promised his disciples difficulty. Expect it to be hard to be a believer. And expect that difficulty living as a Christian because sin is going to keep repackaging itself in a catchy way. And Daniel's told, hey, you're worried about this, yeah. But seal up this prophecy, because this is for the time of the end. Now, there's all kinds of questions, and I could talk to you for the next 3 hours about the various possible understandings of time of the end. And as I said, the easiest thing we can take away is knowing that God's word is true for the past, present, and future. Because time of the end could refer to the end of the Roman Empire, brought in by the barbarian raids. It could talk about the time of the end as being the fulfillment of Christ's earthly ministry. It could be the time of the end, speaking of Revelation, and the end of the world when Christ's second coming, when he comes to reclaim and redeem all of his people. But Daniel's told to seal up this prophecy. Seal it up. It's not for now, he's told. For many days from now. But Daniel's worried, because what does he know? Whether it's soon, a while from now, or way in the future, what does he have to look forward to with all of this? It's going to stay tough. The land isn't going to fix it. Rulers aren't going to get any better. Generations aren't going to get any better. The same sin is going to keep oppressing and making it difficult to live as a believer. It's tough now, and it's going to stay tough, and that scares him. And if we understand that fact, it needs to scare you today too. See the rams and the goats and the trends and the influencers, and see that every one of them is bigger than you are alone. Every one of them. But read verse 25. Goats raise up. This little horn raises up to hinder the worship. Hinder God's people and defy God. But what happens? There's a specific time for him to end, isn't there? 2,300 days, which is a really unusual way to phrase an amount of time, isn't it? And again, we're talking about the little horn, which is likely Antiochus, and 2,300 days is roughly 6 years. And there are actually 6 years from the high priest's death to the rededication of the temple in Israel. And it could be a reference to that sanctuary being restored. But it also can be a picture of something much larger. And what's going to give us hope today, because we're not looking to a temple in Palestine. So it's going to give us hope today, and that you need to see whether this is a prophecy about one specific event or referring to all of the history of believers. See that God has a specific time frame to deliver his people. We're given a specific number. It's not about 6 years. It's 2,300 days. God has a specific time frame to deliver his people from this generational war down to the day, the hour, the minute, the second. Because this king with a bold face who understands riddles. Verse 23, that's how he's described. Bold face, understands riddles. What does that mean? He's my kind of guy. He's a confident, clever person. What's wrong with being confident? He's a confident, clever person. And we've made so many historical connections so far today. But see, this is bigger than just that. This is a recurring pattern in our world. From Daniel's time up to now and moving forward. New, fresh, confident, clever people and ideas are popping up all the time, telling us to look to them for answers instead of God. Rising up like little horns, shouting enormous boasts. They pop up in every generation, talking big and confidently pushing us to trust them and listen to them instead of God. And this little horn problem, our old enemy is back, and this little horn is a problem past, present, and future. See that today. But see further than that. See that God's redemptive plan is at work past, present, and future. Because what happens to that little horn? He enters the land and Palestine kills him? Is that what happens? No. Verse 25, he's broken. but not by any human hand. God has the victory over that confident, clever, boastful distraction. God has the victory. God's enemies lose, and his people are lifted up in his victory. Like we read from Philippians, where Paul was echoing Isaiah, Jesus wins. Take that with you today. Jesus wins. The victory was already won on the cross. See, today, you don't have to be concerned with rams or goats because God gave you his lamb. God gave you his Son to win victory on the cross. And Jesus' salvation works in all generations. The boomlets aren't going to be lost. No more than the baby boomers are going to be lost. No more than Daniel was lost. Christ's salvation works in all generations. Today, join his victory through faith and be promised a new life, where this generational war cannot touch you, where this generational war has ceased, and all generations will bow and confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. How does Daniel end this? The same place we're going to end. Verse 27. He's greatly troubled. But even greatly troubled, Daniel goes back to work. He goes back to serving. He doesn't understand the vision. He's still confused. He doesn't have all the historical perspective. But what does he have? Knowledge of who God is. He goes back to work. He goes back out into his daily life, and he takes his faith in God with him. Go out into this week. Go out to this week trusting that God is not only working, but winning in all generations. Trust that Christ is going to save you. Trust Christ with saving you in this and all future time.